And then over the past, has it been 3 years here?
Almost 3 years.
Yeah, it's been 3 years here. He's been back here at BYU in the Center for Teaching and Learning as an instructionalist.
Kind of a teaching and learning consultant.
Teaching and learning consultant. He's assigned to the College of Ed and a couple of other colleges. So, and I have to say, we have used him at the College of Ed much, and he's very, very handy to have around. So, that being said, we'll go ahead and listen to Dr. Plummer.
Thank you, Dr. Rich. I have a feeling, those of you in the back, this is going to become an eye exam for you just a little bit, because I'm going to have you look at some slides and react. So I think if you come up probably in, good 15, 10 feet, I think you right there are probably in a pretty solid position. Okay, thank you for doing that. Well, I'm grateful to be here with you. Grateful to share with you some of the things that we're working on over at the Center for Teaching and Learning. How many of you have heard of the Center for Teaching and Learning? Have a feel for that? Okay. Some of you actually work there. It's more than just heard. And some are actually working there right now. Essentially, our center is tasked with assisting faculty and programs to assist their students to improve learning gains, improve the learning experience across campus. And so this will probably come as no surprise, but many of our faculty have not actually gone through any type of in-service when it comes to teaching, yet they do, I think, quite a remarkable job, having not had that experience. When I was down at a conference in Atlanta, I talked to some faculty from Georgia Tech, and that just happens to be one of the requirements, that you have a minor in pedagogy. And I thought that was kind of interesting, but that is not the rule. And if it was, maybe we would go out of business over at CTL if everybody was so well trained. And I consider, I never consider ourselves over at CTL, and especially I think anyone from IP&T would definitely not consider us to be experts to any stretch of the imagination on course design. But we do get under the hood with faculty. We do actually talk to carbon-based life form students and try to get a sense of what are they experiencing in the classroom. And so that's been really helpful. And in our work, as we work with faculty, we're constantly asking ourselves, how do we take the best practices, that are based in solid research and theory, and how do we make them palatable and accessible to faculty across campus? And that essentially has become our task. And so in that effort, we've come up with a couple of course design, approaches to course design, and not all of them have the corny title that this one has, but this one does have it. And so let me ask you, when you see that up on the screen, Backflip course design, what's coming to mind right now? What's going on here?
Flipped classroom.
So the flipped classroom part is probably pretty clear. And how would you define the flipped classroom? What are some definitions that you've kind of settled on, if you've heard? I imagine it's become fairly ubiquitous across the country. Yeah.
Content learning at home, and then do practice and group stuff in class.
Very good. Yeah. So, and there's kind of a continuum, and that's kind of the core definition, and you see a variety of variations. That's variation squared out there. What about the back part? Back, flip, back. Yeah.
Seems like a teacher who's got to do a lot of work.
Yeah. That I need at least needs to be nimble, flexible, to do that. Yeah, Charles.
Are you referring to backward design?
Yes, I am. Peter was wondering about that, and so backward design. Now, what comes to mind when you hear that expression, backward design?
To me, it's rethinking. It's doing something different. Usually when something's backward, it's not normal.
Okay.
But
and sometimes can even be good.
that can be very good.
Right.
I'm not saying that's bad. That can be very, very good.
Sure. Yeah.
I was confused when I first learned about backward design because I said this is how all instructional design is. But you start with the end in mind and you work back from there.
Very good. That's the essential definition that you'll hear out there. Some of you maybe have heard of Wiggins and Ty, who have done a lot of work with, and they don't always call it backward design. They have a text they wrote that was published in 2005 entitled Understanding by Design. And they are so heavily cited. You just Google backward design and thousands of citations flow their way. We'll quote them a little bit today. So essentially, what we've come up to at this point, and we're constantly iterating as we work with faculty. We've had some amazing course design plans that have failed miserably with our faculty, and some of them are not excited about having us back, unfortunately. But if they'll stick with us, some really neat things happen. So, okay. I'd like to describe the challenge that this supposed approach is attempting to address. Many of you are probably aware, and just to contextualize that challenge, the Expected Learning Outcomes website houses all of the course expected learning outcomes as well as the program expected learning outcomes that those courses are informing. Any of you seen this website before? Okay. It's an interesting site to go to. Charles and I work on a variety of things with the site to make it better and clearer. In these sites, you can locate all the courses on campus and their course outcomes. And for those of us at the Center for Teaching and Learning, we actually read these course outcomes. And no, it's not like reading the phone book, but it's awful close to that experience. And so, let me just give you a sample, and I hope those of you in the back can I want to give you a feel of some courses out there with their course outcomes. So here's a Spanish phonetics course. Have any of you taken Spanish phonetics before?
That course.
You had this course. Okay.
I have it.
Okay. All right, so you see expressions like understand the basic concepts of articulatory phonetics and phonology. How about understand how the sounds of standard Spanish are pronounced? And who can forget be able to transcribe phonetically both oral and written text in Spanish? How about this course? Any of you taken organic chemistry? Okay. There's a reason we're an IP&T, and it's not because of organic chemistry. Okay. Some expressions like recognize functional group classes commonly encountered in organic chemistry, name representative molecules from each class using IUPAC rules for organic nomenclature. You understand the words, right? Putting them together into a sentence. Okay. And it sounds like I'm mocking these. These are actually very helpful, but just trying to give a flavor and a feel for some course outcomes.
How does so the link to program outcomes, like foundational skills, would be a...
This would be a program outcome, for example, in physics and astronomy.
Okay.
And so they have to, good question, they have to link the course learning outcome to the program learning outcome. Okay, stellar astrophysics. Wouldn't it be fun just to say, I'm taking stellar astrophysics? That would be a fun thing. Explain the equations of state that describe the interior material of a star. Okay. East Asian history. Students will be able to interpret, discuss the meaning and significance of historical events on contemporary identity and foreign relations. And from the College of Education, from early childhood education, emergent literacy. Explain and apply first language acquisition processes that support literacy development across elementary years. And they're renaming the Old Testament, renaming and renumbering the Old Testament course. It's now Religion A 101 Old Testament Survey. And there's a context component, doctrine and principle component, a focus on the Savior in the Old Testament, and then what you can't see down here is personal application component of their outcomes.
Dr. Plummer, can I ask a question? Who writes the course outcomes and the program outcomes?
The instructors generally will write it, or sometimes a person in the department is assigned to do that. Generally, I think that's how it's played out.
And then is there like a correlation committee at BYU who actually approves the outcomes? Like, how do they get passed and put onto the books?
I think it's sort of evolved over time, and in fact, Charles probably may even have a better sense of this than I do, how it came about. But initially, as I understand it, it started like with a wiki where there were a lot of ideas and a lot of outcomes that were collected. And then over time, it's become, essentially faculty have had and departments have had a free rein in terms of what they write. the Center for Teaching and Learning has assisted in helping them consider other possibilities, because most of the early outcomes I've seen actually have expressions of activity, not outcomes, as you would imagine. Like, students will participate in, but eventually that switched to students will identify, understand, analyze, critique. They begin to move in that direction. But a lot of them were at the understand level initially, and very few creeped higher than that on the cognitive process continuum. So, Charles, did you want to, you've had a lot of lived experience with this. Okay.
At the program level, at the course level, faculty pretty much have free reign.
Yeah. And from IP&T 620, how many have taken Principles of Learning? Okay. It's Dr. Yanchar that teaches that course. And here are some of those outcomes. Okay. So here is our challenge. The university has essentially required all faculty to write expected learning outcomes. When you're required to do something, as you can imagine, many times there's an ownership problem. And how does that manifest itself? I'll share with you one way. I interviewed about 17 students with a survey, a new student rating survey, and in the survey, I asked them the degree to which they mastered the course learning outcome. So I asked them, to what degree did you master, and then I read the course learning outcome. Invariably, there was a vacant look in their eyes initially, and they would sit there and think, and they would read it. And I'm just going to give you a kind of prototypical response. It was, that looks really familiar. And then it would dawn on them, for some, the first day of class. I remember it. I remember reading that. Okay. So now some may say, well, that's okay. You could still achieve an outcome that you don't know about, potentially. I mean, it's called discovery learning. You get it, you get there, but maybe there's other ways to express.
Well, these outcomes are all set by the instructor, and so they're the instructor's objectives, and so the instructor has to assess whether or not the instructor has adequately taught these, and so they may not jive with the student's own learning objectives. And I think that's why we can say that it's not discovery learning, it's the students are learning what the instructor is sharing with them, but the student never initially had that explicit outcome as part of the course. You know.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts on students being aware?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we've been moving more towards competencies. And so if a student, I mean, I feel like a student should feel like they're really competent in a specific behavior when they come out of a class. And so it probably should be a little bit more transparent to them that, you know, in organic chemistry, like I know how to, you know, name the type of molecules using a specific protocol.
Sure.
And so,
and I think there's some truth in both. You know, both can come together. I think it probably could be a problem if the default is that they have no clue. That's not a great default. But if the default is that they're aware, and then we can start exploring some of these, I think, higher levels that I think you're referring to. One quote from Wiggins and McTighe I referenced before. They state, our lessons, units, and courses should be logically inferred from the results sought. So these would be expected learning outcomes, or could, not derived from the methods, books, and activities with which we are most comfortable. Now, Dr. Davies has given me the opportunity to teach IP&T 652 3 times. When I first taught that class, it was definitely more content-centric because I needed to teach within my comfort zone. So I don't think any of you fault me for that, right? You're not condemning me for that. Kyle, how are you doing over there? You're okay. Okay. So I started inheriting a syllabus using content, and essentially everything was sequenced in terms of content. Not an awful approach, but it is interesting to go into a class where the focus is more on what students will be able to perform. It is a qualitatively, at least in my estimation, different experience when it moves more in that direction. So we appreciate new faculty when they come in. We don't share a lot of these designs with him. You're in survival mode. You've got those 300 organic chemistry students you have to teach. Just go get a textbook and a syllabus, and let's just get you going through the first semester to live to fight another day. And then we begin to have these conversations. So, enter Backflip design, which we've just talked about, backward design and the flipped classroom. This next slide was to spice up the presentation, in case spicing up was required. And so you've got the chocolate and the peanut butter. That's peanut butter over there. And the idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and you get that. I don't think you needed these slides, but I'm just adding that with your soup today. So,
So you're saying you brought peanut butter chocolate cups?
Conceptually, I have brought this for you, so feel free to ingest that. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about that. I think probably this quote might be helpful.
So Dr. Plummer?
Yeah,
Just a quick question with that. I mean, really, isn't that just a mixed teaching style? Taking two different things, and the sum's greater than the parts.
Mhm.
Isn't a mixed teaching style just taking two different parts and bringing them together?
Teaching style. How would you define teaching style?
Well, so really, that's how I see it. Is at least what I'm getting out of it.
Sure. Yeah.
What I'm getting out of this
Perception.
is we have these objectives, right? And what I've seen is proposed is we need to be able to, we have the objective, great, we have the class, we need to really marry the two together and make sure the students understand the objective throughout
The course.
the course, correct?
I think that's the essence of.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I guess I'm just having a hard time, not a hard time, that's the wrong word. Just seeing why the fancy name for it.
Oh, why the fancy name? We were sitting around a table, and we were asking ourselves, why didn't blended learning capture the imagination, at least in our estimation, of the nation? What is it about hybrid learning? What is it about those terms that don't seem to capture the imagination? And so we had a marketing person there, and he said, let me tell you what I think about flip. And so I began to lay out the principles, and then we were thinking of backward design, and someone said, well, this is like backflip. And that's when there was a pause in the conversation. There was no shaft of light. There was nothing. In fact, we probably should have just left it there. So anyway.
Can I actually, not too far, hopefully off topic, but what's in a name? Backward design, like I said, when I first learned about backward design, I had already learned about instructional design. And I said, there's nothing backwards about this. This is how I've been taught to do instructional design. You always start with your end goal in mind, and you work from there. And but it's amazing the traction, like you said, thousands and thousands of references to this idea of backward design. The traction that this got amongst practitioners and practitioner circles. So sometimes it helps people conceptualize what it is that's really going on. So
Yeah, and sometimes simple expressions like the word flip, we can all visualize. I mean, I say flip, most of you have some mental model that's going on. Some are rather intricate, others are more simple. Backflip, you're there as well. But does it connect with the meaning of what you're about to see? And that remains to be seen. So good comment. Okay, Wiggins and McTighe lay out three pretty typical backward design stages that you'll see in the literature. The desired learning, evidence that that learning has occurred, and then the learning plan that supports those efforts. That's essentially what we have here. This is known as the think model. I'm just showing a couple of these. They're reconfigured, but essentially get at the same idea. So at CTL, we have shared these ideas with faculty, and usually the heads start going like this. Yeah, that sounds good. And then that's about where it usually ends, and that's probably our fault, because we're not really good at communicating with faculty what it would actually look like. So a few of us, if I could just add this one point, we decided to actually backflip the classes we teach, putting the figurative money where our mouths were or are. And it took a lot more work than we had anticipated. In fact, I would say that the ideas we had early on were great. It was when we had to actually put them into practice, that's when it began to fall apart initially. But we iterated to some good places, I think.
I was going to say, in my work I do here at BYU, we use this exact same model for our training. And one of the biggest time consumers is writing good outcomes. and writing good assessment plans for those outcomes, because if you can do that right, the learning plan just kind of, follows logically from it, but it just takes so much time.
Right.
And I was gonna say, the faculty are so busy with doing the research and, trying to teach the classes,
Yeah.
then when you force them to think about writing things the right way, I mean, it's one more thing on the plate.
A couple of questions that have been really helpful in my work with faculty and for myself, because every question I ask them, I kind of throw back at myself in my own teaching. Like, how would I know a student had come out of your class? What would they talk like? What would they think like? What could they do? What theories would they master? And how could they bring that into a real life scenario? I ask the religion professors that, and usually the question is, I'm sitting in Sunday school, and one of your students is sitting next to me. How would I know? And maybe it's not important that there's a distinguishing factor. Or how about our stats department? One stats instructor, the one we worked with, said, imagine I'm sitting at a school board and they're going to move the 6th grade up to the 7th and 8th grade, up into junior high. And they have a report that shows that there's no ill effects of that. What if the generally BYU educated student that took Stats 121 was sitting next to me? Would they raise their hand and say, can I see a copy of that report? Because it's going to impact their daughter or their son. Could they consume that report at a 121 level? So these are questions we try to ask that I hope are helpful, and then they determine how to operationalize those. Okay, this is our little addition that we think has some promise, but also has some, what's a good way to say it? I've tried this with my own students, some that have taken IP&T 652, and I think there have been some good things that have come out of that, but every good idea is fraught with challenge, of course. One course outcome, to use a Lord of the Rings reference, one course outcome to rule them all. One course outcome to bind them. I didn't say in the darkness bind them, because that gives it a dark feel to it. But this is a fascinating experiment that we have faculty do. Could you come up with a course outcome that would bind all the other expected learning outcomes that we have on the website? When I first attempted to do this, or it was suggested to me with IP&T 652, I thought, no way. Those learning outcomes are all very discrete. And then a colleague just sort of talked me through each one, and before I knew it, I could conceptualize something that would bind them all together. So this has been a helpful activity. I'll show you some examples where this is played out. Then a culminating assessment that provides, at that larger course outcome level, that provides evidence from which a faculty member would draw conclusions that students have mastered that particular course outcome. Then we formulate key performances that students must master in order to master the one course outcome to rule them all. And these essentially become the expected learning outcomes. And then finally, develop and sequence learning activities and formative assessments that support that. So this has kind of that Wiggins-McTighe feel to it. So essentially, this is the backward design portion. And this, if helpful, can take the flip approach. Because one thing I've noticed as I have flipped my own courses and work with faculty that are doing this, is that it champions the idea of in-class performance. That they have to come to class ready to perform. And very interesting experience. I taught a course at 7 in the morning. Well, this was another course, Michael. See, Michael wants us to know, because he was in a course, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 6 to a little bit before 8, every morning. And that's what you get with Michael and Kyle. And so we had to move it to the morning because it worked for some of us. And so, anyway. One student said this with a student development course that we teach. They said, I really did appreciate not having to get the lecture prior to class and then come in ready to perform. And some of them said, I got acquired ADD because I was so used to that interaction in class that when I went to my organic chemistry class, it was back to that a little bit. Charles?
I'm just wondering, seems like most faculty and teachers, if you think about K-12, don't really know how to create assessments that really get at what they want to get at, and also meet the need of being able to be done in a timely way. And so that's why they fall back on assessments that have already been created. And it seems like without that step 2 there, having assessments that really provide evidence of that the course outcome has been achieved.
It's kind of a linchpin, the whole
Yeah.
process. Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, if you're coming in to teach a Stats 121 class, and the assessments that were already there were really more related to understanding or related to whatever,
Application, like we call it discrete application,
Yeah.
as opposed to general
then
application.
it kind of makes all the rest, I mean, it's inaccessible to the teachers to be able to do that. I was recently in a meeting with the director of IES, which is the U.S. Department of Education Research Organization. In fact, just on Monday. And they were saying that one of the biggest concerns about some of the changes that are happening in public education right now are people think that the assessments that are going to be created are going to drive the instruction that happens, which I think is a fairly legitimate. And so if the assessments aren't really getting at the things that we want to achieve, and that's no easy task to create, then we're kind of in this loop. But I think my personal feeling is that's oftentimes why instructors, if they look at that, it seems so daunting, they say, well, I'm just gonna teach the content that's in the textbook,
I agree with you.
focus on the understand.
So I really do agree with you on that point, and that's probably one of the areas where we really put a lot of effort as we work with faculty that are attempting to do this, is to conceptualize some performance assessments that they could actually feasibly grade with a large number of students. I think I have an example here in geology. I mean, I actually don't have the actual example, but I think we may get a feel for what that might look like. But it doesn't take away from the comment that Charles said, that this is one of those points in the process that are very challenging to overcome. I personally enjoy this aspect with an assessment background. I really enjoy conceptualizing performance assessments. And so as I've worked with faculty to do, especially with student development, they are a little more performance oriented anyway. It is something that I believe can be done, but we still have a lot of work, especially with large classes. So this is a groundwater course. This is an interesting course. You'll never drink out of the fountain. I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. This is taught by Dr. Greg Carling over in Geological Sciences, showing an example from the IP&T 652 that Michael and Kyle and others took this summer. And I wanted to show you the one outcome to rule them all from Geology 435. And here it is. Dr. Carling is asking his students this very semester to be able, by the end of the semester in December, to produce a consulting type report that synthesizes the groundwater resources, flow paths, and aquifer characteristics of a basin. That's what he wants them to produce. It took him a while to come up with this. Because like I said, most of us in teaching, we're not thinking about that one thing to drive to. But he's feeling pretty confident. And I've been in the class watching him instruct the students as he refers to this outcome. There's probably many directions one could go with IP&T 652. Here's a generic one I landed on. Produce a comprehensive assessment component for a course, program, or institution. Here's his culminating assessment. And he's producing examples as we speak. We're always building an airplane in the sky as we design courses. So he is putting a final report together with instructions and rubrics. By the way, Charles, what he does is that report is due, let's see, as I remember, it's due 2 weeks before the end of the semester because it's pretty lengthy. And then they do peer review, and he's putting them through several phases. So we gave him some of these ideas. We hope it doesn't crash and burn, so we'll see how that goes. Here are the key performances from 435. By the way, I should say, if you look at the blue highlighted words, most of them were understand. They describe or identify. It was only at that level. It wasn't until he conceptualized this course outcome that all of these learning outcomes rose in terms of their cognitive process level. I thought that's been a fascinating phenomenon. Gives them a rhyme and a reason, not just to say students will describe. They'll know, they'll understand. And then here are mine. And then just to nail this idea down, we have the learning outcomes that flow. Yeah.
Yeah, I took that groundwater class back in '91. This is a much different class than the one I took,
Was
the
it?
one that he's describing here. I mean, the concepts and the information is probably still the same, but what I know how to do with it is very limited because we never went that deep in it. So in many ways, this is probably a much better course.
We'll find out in December what happens.
Find out how many geology students are jumping off the cliffs.
Right, into some groundwater basin. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that insight. This is where enter the flipped classroom. This is his schedule in Learning Suite. You'll notice that he actually put his learning outcomes right in the schedule. So they were aware what they were mastering. Here are the pre-class activities and the in-class activities. What I'm really grateful to Dr. Carlin is he's given us an example of someone who's used precious little digital technology. Except for the quizzes, everything is textbook or they have manuals for the lab. That's refreshing for faculty when they think they have to, with a flipped classroom, everything has to go digital technology. There is technology, it's just not all digital here. And then they come into class and then he expands on their homework. This is an interesting experience. I've watched this in his class. Students actually come unprepared for class. You've probably read about that before. It does happen, and in his class as well, in groundwater. But one thing I've noticed is as they get in their groups, you can only turn to your neighbor and say, I'm sorry, I don't know, that just doesn't work very, especially here at BYU. So he said probably by day 2 or 3, they started actually doing their work because he did not review things that he expected them to learn. Now, there was some review he had to do, but this, I think, has been really powerful for him. Oh, let me go back. So here, it's these final December 5th through, they're working on the final paper and grading it as they go. So we're still trying to work through this, because like Charles said, there's some feasibility issues here, so we're trying to figure out how to do that.
So, looking at this, I'm reminded very much of my undergrad at BYU, Idaho, and their learning model.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've looked at that at all.
A little bit, yeah.
But this reminds me a whole lot of
I
what
know-
they're doing.
I knew they do a lot of kind of a be the teacher. You not only, but
Well, yeah, and
part
that-
of learning is that you need to explain it and articulate it. to
And that's the
somebody.
big part, is the teachers don't spend as much time regurgitating information. It's,
Mhm.
you turn to your neighbor and either you can say, I did it or I didn't, and I can explain it or I can't.
Right. Mhm.
And that's,
Yeah,
anyway,
so it might partake.
I'm seeing some connections here that
Okay.
might help.
Very good. Okay, and then here's an interesting thing he's going to try tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. They've all turned in a mini project. Actually, it's on the second learning outcome. Evaluate the relationship between grain size, sorting, and hydraulic conductivity using Darcy's law. He's going to actually have them take their graded reports, turn to their neighbor. They're going to read the learning outcome, and then this person is going to defend their paper just for about 5 minutes. It's just a little activity that he says, I just need to have closure after each expected learning outcome, and then I will help them connect it to what the broader course outcome is. So we'll see how that plays out. I have a lot more digital technology with my pre-class. A lot of these things were not in here. They'll be in here next time when I teach the course, including the final project rubric, even some examples of final projects that are at a higher level and lower level. I told my students, because they all turn in quality work, I have actually sabotaged. Some have gotten their permission to sabotage their final project so that it doesn't have some of the properties it needs to have. With this class, as I look back and got feedback from Michael and Kyle and others, essentially the course reviewed their homework, and we did some expansion, but the next time around I'd like to expand a lot more than what we did. Okay. I think the idea here is that the final project is being conceptualized from day one, and so it becomes a framework wherein as they learn new skills they can put it in that framework. I've sat through a lot of organic chemistry classes. It's nice to sit in organic chemistry where you're not being graded. And just, it's such an elegant discipline. One thing I noticed is students are in a mad dash to get through every single word problem with their eye clickers. And as I've talked to them, I don't sense a framework is emerging in their minds. And I sit with the 250 students. I've been in Stats 121 a lot. Excellent instruction, excellent digital technology that's been refined over the years. I'm just not sure frameworks are emerging from which they could do something meaningful later on. I could be wrong. Let's see. I was going to show you, I think I have a few minutes here. Is it 10 to 1 when we finish up?
Yeah.
Okay. This is another course we're teaching. It's entitled Advanced Reading Strategies. And here I wanted to show you some of the pre-class work. There are 3 components in the pre-class, with the pre-class assignments. First, they need to receive an explanation. This generally is the theory behind a strategy. Then they actually watch a demo on how to use that strategy with a textbook. And then finally, they're asked to practice this. And I wanted to show you, this is a kind of a low-tech version, but I'm just using PowerPoint. So students would go through something like this, and they have these sheets that guide their out-of-class. It's a lot of scaffolding at the beginning, and then the scaffolding comes off as you go through. It's coming at you. There it is. Okay, this is the chapter that some of the examples will go into. I'll just go through this quickly, but this demonstrates for them a case, a way to approach, use this particular strategy. And then let me get to the end here. Okay. So then after they have gone through that, then they actually fill out this sheet that guides them through this particular strategy. Then when they come to class, they'll turn in their assignments, and then we will debrief. They will turn to each other in their groups, and they will, Mr. Econometrics over there will, I don't know why, okay. The person with the econometrics textbook teaches the person with the Spanish poetry textbook on how they constructed meaning from their text. And then they explain how the strategy informed their work. And then the person with Spanish poetry likewise goes the other direction. And I've got a variety of students in this particular class. So they always know when they come in, they've got to be prepared to teach the person next to them. So kind of like the BYU Idaho model. And they report here, and then it's all driving to a performance assessment that they take down in the library. They're all on a computer. We give them this article that compares or expresses the relationship between Sharia law and secular law as it pertains to Indonesian banking systems. Is everybody with me? Okay. And so they go in and they have to determine which strategy is most effective to construct meaning from that article, and they're armed with 22 strategies. If you've been in class and you've paid the price, you're ready for that performance assessment. And students would ask us, how do we prepare for the final? To which we would say, you are. You are doing it right here in the classroom. And it is fascinating to see them go to town. There's very little confusion. They've been practicing. In fact, we have what are called integration days, where they bring a textbook problem and the person they're working with becomes a consultant and draws on all the strategies they've mastered up to that point. Integration days are critical so they can begin to put it all together. So just want to show you some examples of some of the courses we've been working on. And it looks like my time's almost up. I just wanted to share with you some comments from my IP&T 652 students about their experience with this attempt at backflipping a course. So here were some of the positive experiences. And as you look at those, anything stand out to you in particular?
Just the idea of the final project guiding everything done in the class. It's connected to the main outcome.
Also that it was relevant and that inspires the students to want to learn more and kind of dig deeper because it's relevant. It's something that they're interested in.
Kyle, do you mind telling us what was the project that you worked on, or what was the assessment component you were working on? And Michael, get ready. You can share as well.
Yeah, so for my master's project, with a team of other students, we developed a web application for kids in China and kids in the US to play collaborative language games to help learn each other's languages. And my final project was examining ways to measure language development and confidence using a foreign language, just to look at potential impact that students have after using the product.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate that. I really like the idea. There were so many different projects. You'll hear Michael's here in a minute. So as Kyle is getting the skills, mastering the skills, he's applying it to something that's very important to him. In a master's program and a graduate school program, this seems like a pretty natural fit. We're kind of curious about the possibility of doing something at the 100, 200 level courses. A little more challenging, but we think will provide greater retention of the material. Michael, just really quickly, could you share with them your project, kind of the summary?
So I teach IP&T 334, which is a class for technology education majors here in the college, teaching them how to integrate technology with their teaching. And for this class, I decided that I needed to work on some of the assessments, the major assessment pieces for that course. We've got a major semester-long portfolio assignment that they're working on. There is a pre and post assessment, like a final exam, that targets some affective constructs and things. So there was plenty of grist for the mill as I went through the things for this class. It was nice to be able to use a class on like my work. It's not like cheating, but it was like I was getting away with something.
And they did just a great job. Here were some of the less than ideal experiences that I think occurred. If you take a moment and look at that, finish up here. Anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, the second one, if you already had the skill, it's hard to skip an assignment.
Yeah.
I think especially as a grad student, you know, a lot of them, you know, we have people in here who've taught for 20 years. They've got a pretty good idea of a lot of things already, so
Sure.
being able to make it more customizable, I think would be
I think you're right.
huge.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Going off what I know and what I've seen, the final project guiding the whole class, it might have been helpful, that last comment, how to have access to the rubric, kind of orient the learner on what was going on towards the end, what would be specifically required.
Definitely. Okay, well, our time is up. Thank you for this time. Appreciate your feedback. Feel free to contact me. I don't know if you have them. I'm at Center for Teaching and Learning, so BYU, or CTL.byu.edu, and you can find me there. I'd love to get any reactions to this particular approach, and we're always trying to refine and improve as we go along. Thank you for this time.